Hi there, welcome to the Animation Industry Podcast. My name is Terry, and I think you're pretty great for listening to this podcast, so thank you. Now, I have a little story to tell you. When I was still at Sheridan, I got to be part of a stop-motion group film with 10 other students. This was at the height of the pandemic, and so we weren't allowed on campus to use the professional stop-motion studio there. Instead, we had to come up with a story and pipeline to produce a full short film from our homes. And the biggest issue is that none of us lived together, and we all lived across the country. And now, before actual production began, I actually left school to hop onto a TV show. But in this chat, I'm going to bring on some of my fellow classmates to share their experience of producing a stop-motion film collaboratively and remotely, something I haven't really heard of done before. The backgrounds are made by one person, shipped to somebody else, etc., etc. What's even crazier is that this film they produced is 9 minutes long. It's called Cantastoria, and it is about a jovial puppeteer and her mice assistants recounting the fairy tale of Mona and Skip, a pair of traveling storytellers in search of an adventure on their own. This story is filled with creepy stuff, magic, fantasy, and some really fun and colorful characters. I've included a link to it in the description of this podcast, so please check it out. It's already been making the festival rounds, and it is simply an amazing film. So today with me, I have 4 of the teammates from Cantastoria. There's Anna Harestad, a storyboard revisionist with Jamfilled, whose recent grad film has also won a bunch of awards. It's also in stop motion, and she's a professional voice actor. There's also Heather Little, a recent Sheridan grad who's an animator and storyboard artist. Tawny Therrien, a former Sheridan student who's working on a storyboard portfolio as we speak. And Stephen Belford, a storyboard and layout artist who has to his name the perfect apple pie recipe, which he refuses to share with me. Now, before we get into this really cool and extra special episode that I feel personally tied to, this episode is sponsored by Hue, makers of colorful plug-and-play cameras for learning, work, and play. Originally designed for teachers, Hue cameras can also be used for creative activities such as capturing hand-drawn pencil tests and shooting behind-the-scenes footage, time-lapse videos, and stop-motion animation, of course. Their cameras have flexible posable necks, manual focus controls, and they're compatible with Dragonframe, OBS, Twitch, Zoom, and many other camera apps. Visit huehd.com to learn more and follow @HueCameras on social media for news, fun, and giveaways. And for a limited time only, Hue has been super generous to give listeners of this podcast a 10% off code for any Hue camera purchases through Amazon.com. So that's Amazon.com. Get 10% off with the code 10TerryAIP. That's 10, my name, Terry, and Animation Industry Podcast, AIP. And I've included the code in the description of this chat, so please check it out. And that is valid until July 19th, 2022. Now, without further ado, let's jump into the chat. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to have all of you here. I, of course, know who you all are, and you're my former classmates. But why don't we go around the room? And you all finished up on this amazing stop motion group film project as part of Sheridan College's requirements to make an award-winning film. Why don't we go around and say, your name and your involvement on the project?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Anna Harestad. I was one of the production managers for Cantastoria. I was also the animation supervisor and the sound supervisor, but I kind of had my fingers in every single pie on the project. I was also one of the voice actors. I played Skippy Joe.
Every single pie.
Call me Georgie Porgy.
Okay. Heather, why don't you go next?
Yeah, hi there. I'm Heather Little. I was a fabrication artist, animator, and storyboard artist on Cantastoria.
Tawny, you're up next.
I did. My name is Tawny Therrien. I did writing, storyboarding, and fabrication with Heather for Cantastoria.
And last but not least,
howdy. I'm Stephen Belford. I was the layout supervisor on Cantastoria, and I also worked on the story, the storyboards, and the fabrication. So actually, I animated one single mouse as well. That's
And it was the best mouse in the film.
oh, but
I think it's crazy, like being in the professional world where you're brought into a stop motion production and it's like like, for instance, I actually quit this project to take on a studio job in stop motion, which was really a super experience for me. But like coming off something like this where you're doing everything and then you come into a studio and you only sit there and just watch until like the puppet people have done their stuff, the lighting people have done their stuff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And your only job is to do like one thing. It's like so interesting to like, hear how many roles you actually had on this project, and which is crazy. You're like doing everything. So, okay, why don't we dial it back a bit? Like, the inception of this film is part of like Sheridan Animation Program's requirement to make a third-year group film. Who wants to start on like how the stop motion film actually came together? Because it's kind of a unique thing at Sheridan to actually have a stop motion group film, because Sheridan specializes in 2D rigged animation and hand-drawn animation. And so who wants to share how that actually happens at Sheridan with, how it happened?
Well, and it was interesting too, because it was also, turn of the pandemic, beginning of quarantine. And I know, for example, I think everyone had kind of a unique experience applying to be in the stop motion. I know like me and Tawny had a unique experience of kind of being locked in an apartment together and, building our little puppets and like learning how to do stop motion for the first time together. And then also at the same time, like kind of picturing and imagining these pitches and what, we were going to bring to the table when it was time to like suggest what to make. And I don't know, that was all really fun, I found.
Yeah, it's so like Sheridan, it's a requirement to make a group film in your third year. And then if there's enough people applying to do it in stop motion, then a stop motion group can happen. But like what you just said is super interesting to me, because, I have some experience in stop motion before this, but being in a predominantly 2D animation program and then the pandemic happening and then not having access to any of the stop motion resources or equipment at Sheridan College, and then doing it like in your apartment, what compelled you to be like, you know what? We've been learning 2D animation for 2 years. Let's start stop motion and see how that happens, and start it in our bedrooms. And like, what compelled you to kind of, take this new twist in animation?
Well, for me personally, that was one of the reasons I actually went to Sheridan's, because it's not a very common thing. Like it's such a kind of a niche medium that a lot of schools don't really offer a comprehensive stop motion animation education experience. So for me, that was like, I knew from day one that that's what I wanted to try, but I didn't actually get to try it until the portfolio we had to make for applying for this film.
Yeah.
I think a big, you had to kind of find what you were passionate about at school. Like we have 2 years of working and touching like 3D and 2D, and everyone kind of gets a sense of it. But stop-mo isn't really a thing until third year. And I think a lot of us were really excited to get our hands on that, because as part of the application process, you had to build like a puppet, you had to do like a little mini short film. There was lots of little stuff. So you kind of got to test the waters almost. And I think it was a lot of fun to put together that portfolio and be like, oh, I made like a little puppet in my room and now he's like talking and dancing or whatever. And then, we all kind of came together and did a really fabulous film. So
I think sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was like, I think that's really true. Just like we're all very like creative people, and if we can get our little fingers into something like tangible, like we're just gonna like grab that opportunity. Because that's how it was for me and Heather, because like we're both very crafty and we both like building stuff, and like it's really fun. Just that's why I went into it. I wanted to do like fabrication work, do miniatures and stuff.
So
and turns out we did megatures, but it's still fine.
It's huge, actually. So none of you had actually done anything kind of stop motion related before this experience? No. So did anybody have any fears that trying out this new super niche medium might stray you off of like because how the industry is set up kind of in Canada and Toronto, and Sheridan College is specifically Sheridan like cookie cutters you into television animation, like Toon Boom animation. So did anybody have any fears of like, skipping out for a whole year of practice in 2D to do stop motion, which is, a bigger risk to find a career in?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that was the thing for me, even coming into fourth year. And there was a lot of like, a lot of people in third year that were working on those 2D films were kind of learning on the job and learning from their classmates and, figuring stuff out in those moments. And I found that coming into that film, there was so much I had to learn in that moment. And that was something I knew was going to happen. I don't regret at all getting to try the stop motion regardless,
Yeah, I would say that if anything, it ended up strengthening, at least for me, my animation skills. It's a completely different mindset that you have to go in with. I was very fortunate, and Heather was also very fortunate. We both have a background in paper animation before we came to Sheridan. So getting to kind of use the knowledge that we had from traditional, like on paper, flipping back and forth, and then putting that into kind of straight away, helped cultivate going back to digital and 2D and rigged puppet in kind of a very strange way. But yeah, at the beginning, I was, as much as I personally knew that I wanted to try stop mo, that was something I was very interested in. I wasn't 100% like, is this going to be like the thing that I end up going into? Is this going to end up hurting my career chances in the future? But I found that in the long run, it was a very valuable learning experience.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. Because my next question was going to be, were there anything extra you learned that you think you got out of stop motion that you noticed other people don't have this skill set that you got specifically from like working on this film in such a different medium?
Yeah, I'd say you kind of develop an eye for detail in working in a completely different space. Especially like all of us were kind of involved in the boarding process, at least tangentially, even if we weren't like actual boarders on it. I know Stephen did a lot for that. But you learn how to see things in a different space, and you learn how that things are a lot more tangible. It's just kind of like the more you know, the more you can apply it to different things in a very surprising way that I don't think a lot of people realize.
Yeah, I will say one thing that was really eye-opening for me was coming into it. I hadn't really made a film that was like physical, tangible items before. Everything was always like a drawing. So you might slap like a texture onto something to add it like a little bit of pizzazz, but nothing ever had like that really tactile feel to it. And there was kind of this moment early on where we were in the design process and we'd been kind of toying with the idea of like putting a frame around the film and like we could make it out of wood and all that stuff. And we'd done some drawings and paintings. And then Terry, you did one of a dragon and like a knight in a castle. And I remember distinctly being like, oh yeah, this is going to be made out of like, wood and paper and pipe cleaners and whatever we can get our hands on. And it's going to be like very real and physical. And it was a very cool moment of like everything that you draw when you're storyboarding for like stop mo is going to be like a real tangible thing that will have like a texture and a feel. So like, at least even after the film, I find I still like think about that when I'm designing stuff, when I'm like painting. I'm like, what actual material is this made of? Because it's such a cool part of stop motion to have like an actual physical puppet and a physical set and like physical lighting. So
yeah, 100%. Like what you just said is kind of when I'm storyboarding for stop motion, my mind is in a totally different space, because like when you're storyboarding for 2D, you can do whatever you want. But for storyboarding for stop motion, I keep things like much more simplified and more like almost like layout driven, I guess. Like, I don't know if that makes sense, because I'm always thinking of like, what can I stick on a 3D plane, and like how, like what materials can I use? And that's like, I'm super happy you made that observation. Okay, so let's fast forward a bit. So we all get accepted into doing stop motion, the group film, and it's also the height of a pandemic, and none of us have access to any stop motion cameras, studio space, anything. And we, don't have super experience doing stop motion or a group film together, like working with one another. And then like the first thing we're supposed to do is like come up with a story. So like Heather and Tawny, Heather, it was your original story, I believe, right? Was that correct?
It was something that like at some point in second year, I pitched to Stephen on the way home, and then Stephen and Tawny kind of took that idea and like they really dug into it and sort of built it into this thing that could actually be a film. Because it started with this idea of like, how cool would it be to just mix all these different mediums? If you could tell the story of puppetry through like every kind of, and this idea of like something tactile that'd be really interesting. And it was Tanya that had the idea of like using the mice as the assistants and using that as a way to kind of tell the story and how it would be a loop. And I don't know, it was really fun because to me it's something that like I don't know, got to like kind of build as it was going. It was just like once it kind of got into the hands of like everybody else, right? And it became this big group thing, everybody got to kind of add a little bit of themselves into it. I don't know, that was something that I thought was really special about it.
No, totally. And there's so many levels that, sorry, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. I think also what's very interesting about this pitch specifically is right from the very beginning, even before it was brought to the rest of the group, it was a collaborative experience, which I think was something that was very important to everybody going into it, was that this was something we had to work on together. So it was kind of cool that that's the inception of the story. And then it just kind of kept going forward with that. And it really kept the spirit of what a group film is supposed to be and what the story that we all crafted together itself was about telling stories and the power of those stories.
Totally. It was like this meta thing. I remember like it wasn't my story, but I was like helping writing it. And I felt like so like internally compassionate about like these characters and like the moments that had to happen and everything. Okay. So, but you came up with this story before the pandemic, essentially, just kind of based on like how cool it would be to tell a story through like different mediums and textures and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the pandemic happens.
Yeah.
And it also kind of, you know, coincidentally, because we all had to work on this group film together, and stop motion is like a very in-person thing, but we're like, you know, some people were in the US, some people were like halfway across the country, some people were in Toronto, some people were in Oakville, et cetera, et cetera. So like, how did this story take into consideration that we would have to be stop motion animating this from like our bedrooms across the world? Like, you know, I mean, well, I know, but I'm just wondering how you can share what ended up happening.
Yeah, well, once we had kind of an idea, like Heather had her idea, and then I like worked on a little bit and had an idea, and then we both like meld minds and like tried to see like how we could like make it work, because it was in the middle of the summer when we were like actively working on it, because we were both applying stop motion. We wanted to make the story happen because it's a cool story, those little mice and puppetry and everything. So we actually had it in mind while we were building the story, that it could be two separate plots, that in one of them we could like kind of spread out, because the paper ones, like it's a bunch of different scenes and stuff, so it's easier to like spread out the play bit, and then it would just be like the main puppet that would need like a home. So it was like the story was written with that in mind, that we would have to make it like. And it was part of Heather's pitch too. We did some drawings for that, like in the beginning of the year, of just like, how can we build this and then send it to different people at different stages of production. So it was definitely, we wrote with that in mind.
I can't think of a single example of anything I've heard of during the pandemic where like such a production came to be, where, because there were like two subplots, or there's two plots to this film. There's like the main, I guess they're both main, I don't know, equal. There's one with like the 3D puppet characters, which you created and animated in like one of your apartments.
Yeah,
and a couple of you lived close by, so you were animating that. But then like this other plot was all paper cutout animation, which was like, you know, cut out and mailed to people so they could animate it at their homes, and then you like compiled it together through after. Like, tell me this process, because it sounds crazy.
No, you nailed it. That was exactly it.
Yeah.
Oh, that was exactly it. See,
Yeah.
I don't know if I mentioned, but I also like dropped halfway. Right before animation started, I ended up leaving the project. So I don't like, I kind of anecdotally know what was supposed to happen, but maybe you can enlighten me on the whole like challenging process and how that actually went. Like, you know, how did you go from taking our designs that we made in Photoshop, and that's super easy to like share, to actually putting it into production, putting it together into a stop motion film?
So that was one of the strangest parts of doing this. Was we at some point realized like we have to get these cutouts perfect, because they have to, you know, we have to have continuity to think about. And Stephen is actually our hero. I think he like saved the film in that regard. Stephen, you should tell us about that experience, because holy crap.
Yeah, so it wound up, our film was divided into two segments. The one has the giant puppet, which lived in Heather and Tawny's living room for the entire year. And then the other was this paper cutout one where we had to have all of these tiny, fine little paper puppets that would act out on the screen, which is great conceptually because it's super easy to transport paper. It's very flat. It's very compact. But then in reality, you have to cut out like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tiny little hands and feet and stuff. So I got a Cricut cutter, which is like a plot cutting machine, which you can feed, documents into, and it'll spit out your digital file as like a physical cutout thing. So I found a few of them, but you get a sheet, and the sheet, like many.
Oh my goodness, that looks insane.
For the audio, it's like audio listeners, it's like just an entire paper just filled with intricate little cutouts, and it's the most insane thing ever. It's like, how did you do that?
But yeah, so I cut down these giant sheets of watercolor paper to 12 by 24. I would cut out like many, 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 many little paper puppets onto them, and then I'd sit there with a dental pick, and I had to one by one pick each and every one of them off of this sticky mat, and then divide them into bags and sort them so that each thing was like.
Did you also label them?
Bible, yeah, everything had to be labeled because there was like backgrounds, there was characters, there was effects, there was everything. So I had like little Ziploc bags all along my thing with each character's name and like each background and everything set up, and then it all got divided. And then to get it from my house in one giant pile to everybody, Diana, who's another one of the people that worked on our film, was a godsend because she drove down to my house, picked up the bags, and then disseminated them to everybody, so everyone had their own little puppets to actually like animate with.
But before they all got sent out to everybody, a big shout out to Kia Cordelainen and Dina Fam, who sat down and hand painted every single one of these pieces.
Oh
Yeah,
my
all the
goodness.
characters, all the props.
Every character, every prop, all painted by hand. And every single one of them was painted to have continuity. So they did that by hand and then
And
spread them out to
too,
everybody
no?
else.
Yeah.
Mhm,
So they
yes.
Yeah.
every single there must have been 1,000 pieces of puppets, and then on the other side of that, all of the backgrounds also got divided up, and Alex Wang and Ray Minos painted the other set of backgrounds. So there's these giant massive watercolor paintings that are all of the backgrounds of our films, which are also like in
You should frame them. They need to be framed.
I think so too.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
That's insane. Okay, so to sum up, you put into the computer in this Cricut cutter the shapes, and it cuts them out on giant slabs of watercolor paper, which you use because it's like thicker and easier to animate, I guess. And there was a sticky film on it that you had to.
Okay, so the process was essentially that you get heavy 190-pound watercolor paper. There's a sticky mat, which the plot cutting machine uses to anchor the material cutting. So you'd stick the watercolor paper to the mat, and then it would go through the machine. It would cut out all of the little intricate puppet shapes, so I didn't have to do any of that by hand, which was blessed. I think we did one version, or I did one version of Mona by hand to see what it would be like. By the end, I couldn't like hold the knife. So it cut out all of these little puppets, and you pick each piece of the puppet. So like hand, forearm, upper torso, lower torso, head, hair, eyes, etc. It gets divided into a bag. It got sent to Diana and Kia to paint. And then from there, it was disseminated to whoever was animating whichever character.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was a bit of a logistical miracle, I think.
Yeah. Well, especially because you had multiple of the same character as well, because depending on the animator, we would sort of block off shots to be like, you would get, X and X characters. So there would be multiple puppets of the characters or characters in different stages as they appeared in the film as well. So
yeah. Like huge thanks to you also for setting up the whole document that tracked who had what and where everything went, because like that was a miracle in and of itself.
Wow. I have so many more questions. Just random questions. It was painted in watercolor?
Yeah. I will gouache, I believe.
Gouache and acrylic.
Gouache?
Yeah.
And
The
I
fun of
thought
first year
I never
supplies.
want to touch gouache again after having to use it in first year. So I'm impressed you used that. Second of all, how did you actually, how were the puppets assembled once somebody got them? Were they like little pins in them or like string, or did they just sit on a flat surface and you move them that way? Or
Yes, we tested it multiple ways, and it turned out that the who was the one that finally decided on the animation style for the flat? Was that was Diana's test, right?
Yes, I believe so. That was Diana. She had a really awesome test. And when it came to setting up the green screen, Kia Cordeline, she was the one who kind of like helped do the lighting and everything to make sure everything was uniform.
Yeah.
So it was a series, a lot of tests that we did. I remember Tawny, you had some tests too as well. That were really helpful. We had one that somebody tried doing it completely upright, which was really interesting to see what was feasible and what was not given the time.
Yeah.
And we ended up deciding that green screen flat surface was the best way to do it.
And so the puppet pieces would just be sort of slided above one another, very similar to how you would do, say, a 2D rig in Harmony. Sort of pieces just going above or below each other, and then they would just get slid around. People would use like tiny tools to kind of get them in accurate position.
so they weren't actually attached to each other. They were just kind of free floating. Oh, nice.
Free floating.
And everybody had to have kind of the same camera setup at home, I guess. Like you said, like green screen, like just a Bristol board, and then like the camera pointed directly down on it or something with flat lighting, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah.
We had Kia did a bunch of workshops with the 2D animators to do that. I say 2D, but they were stop motion. It's so confusing, the logistics of it sometimes when we talk about it. But the cutout animators had all like, they had like a big workshop and they all sat down together and made sure that everything was uniform. Kia was the other production manager on that, and she was an absolute godsend in that sense. Very extremely organized. So it was like just getting everything kind of out in the woodwork. It was incredible.
So you mentioned that you would do workshops with everybody. So you were like testing things out, learning on your own. And then if you learned something, you would be like, hey, everybody jump on a call and this is how we're going to do it. And then you teach everybody else at the same time.
Yeah.
Were you running your own stop motion school? Is that for yourselves? It sounds like
kind of. When you put it like that, a little bit. We had this huge Discord server that we'd have things for every single different production like pipelines, like, oh, here's the chat for 2D layouts and stuff. Here's the chat for storyboarding. Here's how we're going to handle certain things. And we'd hop on call. We'd have weekly meetings, everybody together, and then each group would have their own meetings. Yeah,
I'm just wondering because, like, you know, everything's kind of gone work from home with studios except for stop motion. But it sounds like even, well, you guys did figure out how to do stop motion remotely as well, which I think is super incredible. So then people would finish their shots. I'm assuming you use drag and frame and then upload them to like a drive or something. And then you'd have to compile them in like After Effects or something like that afterwards.
That's exactly correct. So they'd submit we had like a huge kind of shot tracker in Google Docs and stuff that we'd all sort of like, here's my shot. We'd mark it off as ready for like review and stuff. I, as the animation supervisor, would go in and I just, we did a lot of weeklies or like dailies. And so instead of having people do the entire shot and then get critique, because of the nature of stop motion, it takes a long time to do one shot. So you want to make sure that you're getting kind of progress shots. And if things need to be fixed, they can go back and redo just little fractions of the shot as they go. So someone would send me a shot and I'd be like, oh, watch out, you're missing a pupil in this, or there's a pop happening with the arm right here, can you redo that? We were very fortunate where we had a very, very talented group of animators, so we really didn't have to do that a lot. The bigger puppet had a few more, we had a couple restarts on shots. We had one shot that we got a really, really long way through and we realized, oh my gosh, we have to redo the whole thing. But yeah, that's just the nature of stop motion. So we scheduled in time for reshoots as well, which was very helpful to us, especially because we didn't actually end up needing it for the cutouts. Those ended up being those got picked up really, really quickly in terms of how they were done. Nice. I love that you could essentially have just made this in 2D or like rigged Harmony, but we actually had a teacher who was like, why don't you just do this in Harmony? And we're like,
it's stop motion.
We are the stop motion film group, so I feel like that might defeat the purpose.
One of the other questions I had just on the cutouts, you know, storyboarding and having your finalized like animatic, et cetera, how easy was that to take and turn into the cutout animation? Because like you could kind of take the layout of what's already in your storyboards and just copy paste that into your cutter. No, yeah, is that what happened?
Well, none of. Oh, sorry.
Well, what actually ended up happening was for each shot, we would take, for characters, we would take each major action they were doing and plan out like hands that they would use. So all of their hands were, you know, drawn out separately. So the machine can't just take like any drawing and then cut it out kind of thing. It has to be like a very specific format. Generally, it likes like vector-based images, but there's some pretty easy stuff you can do to make it accept like just black and white PNGs. So every background was painted as like a big matte painting that represented the like final look. And then it was divided into like black and white shapes. And then each layer would be cut individually. And then same with the characters, like the painted, quote unquote, like final versions of them were drawn digitally. Then they were converted into like black and white silhouettes and then cut out as a black and white silhouette. And then from there, they were then painted to look like the digital painting, which was the same for the backgrounds. You take a digital painting and then try to mimic it in real life. And I think honestly, like everyone did a really good job of matching the digital versions really well.
Yeah. We were also, because we were green screening these, that gave us a little bit more freedom to move the puppets around in space. So if it's like, oh, this puppet is too big for this shot, we can just take it and make it a little bit smaller in post and then make it fit the shot. So that was a huge help when it came to compositing things.
So like I'm asking because, you know, getting proportions and layout physical space is like super challenging sometimes in 3D space versus like your 2D and your 2D storyboards. So, but it sounds like the process was actually quite fluent for the cutouts. But how was the, you know, working in the 3D space where you made this almost like, is it the size of a small child? Like how tall is it?
She is. I'm looking at her right now.
She looks incredible though. Also, like
she's our baby. Yeah, she's like the size of an infant.
If you're only listening to this, please go to YouTube and check out what Anna is holding because it's insane. The like details on the like fringe on the outfit and like everything.
She's like 2 feet tall.
2 feet tall.
Yeah. She's only from the chest up. So she is
Are you able to show that part of her off?
Wee.
Oh.
So her internals are made of PVC piping. And so the bottom of her is, you can kind of see it a little bit. She's foam and PVC piping and sort of not, you know, when, for example, you're making a wired armature, we use the similar technique with this, where you sort of twist the wire, but a bit of a thicker, sturdier wire than you would typically use.
So she's completely posable, like right now. Wow.
She's a little bit weak right now because she got a lot of really good use during the actual filming, but also her clothing is posable. She's got wires running through every single bit of her. Everything is kind of stiffened so that it's easier to work with. But yeah, she's pretty much entirely able to move around. Her eyes are posable. Her mouth is posable.
Totally. Yeah. Tell me about how
you have her hands on her. Oh, sorry, Terry.
One of her hands fell off, but this is these beautiful ball joint hands.
Oh wow, they sound great as well.
Yeah, they're get that ASMR in there.
I was gonna say, tell me specifically about how you made the head and hands, because you know, fully articulated, that hand is the size of your hand. Like,
yeah, it really is.
Maybe bigger.
I've got longer fingers, but the palms are about the same.
So tell me about, you know, making this life-size animatable thing that has to blink, open and close its mouth, pose, like, and for the first time, because I know there were so many challenges in just figuring out how to make it even.
That was there was a lot of doing the summer puppet making, because me and Heather did a lot of research on how to do that. We spent like so much time just making the puppets and not a lot of time on the rest of it, but so I think we started with a little bit of a leg up for at least like information that we could find off YouTube. But other than that, it was a lot of just like lying on the floor and crying and be like, how because it has to be strong and it has to be light. And I think
well, in a lot of prototypes, a lot of like
so many prototypes.
Yeah, we had like, for example, a head made out of cardboard. There'd be a lot of sort of unhinged moments of Tawny walking into the living room, and I'd be like, look, I've made a cardboard skull and the jaw moves, and we attach it like this, and there's a strange cardboard pipe, and Tawny'd be like, no, that doesn't work, why don't we? And Tawny really liked the engineering on how her body was going to work, and these replaceable wires in the PVC piping. That was sort of a awesome breakthrough from Tawny, because I had these very broken, like, oh, look, if I put a ball on the tube here, and one of them was we bought this like Halloween skull to see how we could sculpt the head. And so there was for a long time this very freaky, this cut up Halloween skull covered in plasticine, just living in the living room for a while. So a lot of it was trial and error at the end of the day.
Yeah,
eventually it's going to be Halloween anyway, so you already have some props for
yeah, well, literally, I had a Halloween party with these guys and she was there. Nobody liked it.
It's always like, that's part of what I love about stop motion so much. It's the insane amount of like backstories and work that goes into it that like nobody sees really, to figure out just how to make something work for like 1 second. It's just crazy. So tell me about the experience of, you made this life-size doll, then you had to make a life-size layout. Like, tell me the challenges of actually making a layout around this doll in your apartment and filming it and everything, because that's also crazy to me that you did that.
One thing that anybody who is familiar with stop motion or has ever animated in stop motion knows is that it requires a lot of space. And the bigger your puppet, the bigger your set is going to have to be. And we actually, the pandemic ended up working in our favor because we were no longer allowed to be in the facilities for Sheridan. At Sheridan in the third year studio, it's basically a closet. It's fine if you have like, smaller sets and you get a couple people working in there, but the size of set that we needed was far bigger than anything that we would have gotten at the Sheridan third year studio.
I think 10 feet, 11 feet long that we ended up requiring by the end of it. Yeah.
It was half of Heather's living room.
Wow.
And another, it was a very big set, and it was this ginormous wooden floor. If you've seen the film, there's this beautiful wooden floor that's been made, and that one was painted by, I think it was Alex and Kia. They painted they stained every single popsicle stick by hand and glued it down onto this piece of paper, and then brought it over to the apartment, and we put it onto this little stage that we had, and it was enormous. And then we have like this little she's in the film, she's got this little mini stage, and that had to be a certain size, and that had to be like attached to the floor and stuff. And then we had like this huge backdrop behind her, which went all the way to the ceiling, and even then we had to like cover some of the ceiling with black to make sure that you couldn't see any of it. And for light control, you can't work in a space that has windows, so the only place that we could work was right next to these huge windows. So they got covered with tinfoil, and they were on the second floor, so you could see it right from the street. It was going
painter's tape, tinfoil. You'd look at outside and be like, what is going on in there?
At night, you just see like holes in the tinfoil with bright lights like coming through just from your set stages. Why did you decide to make the puppet so big? Like, why not make a super tiny puppet like the size of your hand, and then just make like a little tiny stage?
Well, one of the reasons was the mice. So her assistants are these little felted mice, and the mice are interesting because they ended up being pretty articulate. I don't know if you have one on you, Anna.
Oh, I have one
somewhere.
Oh, do you?
I think I might have hacked her away already.
So these little mice, they're also pretty small. So you base the scale on these little mice.
Yes.
Yeah, because otherwise they would have to be just minuscule to be able to show up on camera.
I have eyebrows.
Yes.
But yeah, like
we have all these little mice.
Heather made
I love
all
them.
These.
So they're interesting because they're two felted foam circles that have been attached to each other through very loose sort of felting in the neck, and then otherwise we just sort of drilled holes into them afterwards and fed wire through.
Oh wow.
So
you drilled a hole into the
felt just with I don't even remember how we did it, like a pencil or like chopsticks, things like that.
Near the end we had like this tiny little hand drill
That's right.
that I have, the jewelry drill. So we have like, it's funny, as a stop motion artist, you accumulate a bunch of weird little tools and weird little like craft supplies.
Yeah, and the mice were really fun for that. Most of their costumes were made out of like fake leather, so we had like little leather paint and stuff like that because it made them nice and sturdy. They weren't going to collapse.
Wow.
A lot of pins.
A lot of pins.
The mice were something else entirely though, because Heather essentially assembled like all of them, right?
7 mice, yeah.
But the amount of felting that goes into like one mouse is insane. And Heather made 7. So we'd be sitting there for weeks and we'd be having like meetings where everyone's talking about what's going on in the film and what we have to do. And in the background, you just hear like, and we'd be like, what is that? What's going on? Who's everybody? And then it would stop. And we were like, what is that? And then we realized it was Heather, because Heather had to felt all of the mice for so long that there was like multiple weeks where it was just soft felting noises in the background of all of our.
I ended up jumping on to help because we were filming at the exact same time that we were finishing these mice, which is, especially with this film, there was a lot of overlap between when things were being made and when things were being filmed.
Yeah.
It wasn't just everything was made and then everything was filmed. So we were like, all right, we got an hour. Let's do some mice.
Yeah.
Wow.
You got stabbed so many times.
A lot. Yeah, you would hear those little and the occasional like, my mouse mic gets muted, you know.
I mean, that's kind of fitting for the story. So
literal blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah.
This is crazy. And you're also doing classes like full time on the side of this as well. Like this is just
very
insane.
full time.
So many classes.
So how many people were involved in this film in total by the end?
11.
11.
Yeah.
Not
Wow.
including our mentor and we had 3 additional voice actors. We had our tech Alina's and we had our mentor Mike.
And our music guy.
And our music guy, Will Farmer. He was incredible.
Yeah.
And
Terry got for us.
Yeah.
Will Farmer is the guy who did the intro and exit music of this podcast.
Oh yeah.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was just spectacular. And I believe he's based in the UK, isn't he?
Yeah,
he is. So that was just another remote aspect. All of our voice actors were down in the US. So that, except for me, I was still here.
Wow, what a production. It's just crazy. I think this, like, you know, if you just watch the film, you'd be like, oh, wow, this is really cool. And then to learn that this is the COVID-19 pandemic made through mailing each other stuff happen. Like, I'm speechless. I'm just like so impressed by you guys. So proud of like, you know, the whole film and everything. And the amount of like effort and talent that you guys put into this is just insane to me. So, okay. So you wrap up the film and then you probably all cried when it was done.
Yes.
And then what? So you've submitted it to film festivals and it's doing a little circuit right now, I think? Or is that
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we went to 3 very huge film festivals. We got into the Ottawa International Animation Film Festival in Ottawa, obviously. We got into the Toronto Animated Arts Film Festival International, TAFE in Toronto, and we got into Spark Animation in Vancouver. And we still have a couple that we're waiting on. But we've gotten, now that the film has been released, we've gotten a kind of a renewed interest in its festival run. So we might go for round 2. We'll see. But it's been really cool kind of getting our film out there and seeing the positive reception that's come from it, especially because it makes it feel real. You know, we finished it and we sent it out into the world and we're like, all right, arrivederci, have fun out there. And just it's kind of interesting to see it come back in the way that it has.
Especially with it being a pandemic film, you know, because with its release, it was just sort of a very quiet online thing, even with the festivals. You know, it would be something that kind of a typical experience of, you know, you get to go even just with your classmates and you watch the film in the school's theater, or if it gets into festivals, you would go and sit down, you would watch it, maybe go out to dinner, you know. It was a much more sort of quiet release. It was this big, you know, production and all of these things happened. And then it was just kind of very much so over. So there's something very nice now about it being out where it gets to feel like, oh no, we did actually make a film and it is real and it's out there now. And that's very cool.
Yeah. I'm wondering, you know, I'm just thinking 11 people on a group project and you're all working on one thing and you're not even really in the same room as each other most of the time. How did you keep everybody motivated? Because there's not like one director where it's like, you know, this is my project and not that directors sound like that, but it's not like you know, in a traditionally made show or film or whatnot. It's like this big collaborative effort. And even Tawny, at the beginning, you were saying, or I don't know who was saying about, the story was even a collaborative thing from the beginning, and everybody kind of put their own stuff into it. Other than the tie of having this group film project, how did you keep everybody, on the same path and purpose and on schedule and like figuring this all out? Because you all had school full time. You also had to start applying for internships at the same time. So putting together like a portfolio, I know, and then working on this film, and then dealing with the stresses and all the fun stuff that comes with online school and a pandemic. Like, how did you rally the troops essentially throughout this process?
I think the first major thing that we did was we made sure that everybody was on the same page for what we wanted out of the project. I remember we kind of like in one of our very first meetings, we all sat down and we were like, hey, let's all go around, we'll introduce ourselves, and we will say, what do we like about stop motion? What are we looking forward to of this film? Like, what do we want to do? And for the most part, everybody was very much on the same page where they liked that stop motion is kind of creepy. They wanted to do something weird. They wanted to do something fun. And it kind of just ended up being sort of the perfect project and the perfect group for it, I would say. We got very fortunate because to be in the stop motion group, you have to be dedicated to even get into the group. So you have to be dedicated to stay. And there were plenty of hiccups. It was a very difficult experience for a lot of people. There was a lot of burnout happening, and it's very easy to kind of fade into, your own sort of thing when you're not meeting with people in real life. But I think for the most part, we were very conscious about communication. My role as a production manager, and same with Kia, we work together a lot to try and facilitate positive experiences and positive environments. We really wanted to stress that we have to work hard, but we have to make sure that we acknowledge the good work that we all do. There's no such thing as wasted work. We can always learn something from it. And as long as we're in communication with each other, and as long as we are acknowledging what we do well and what we can improve on together, it's very much a group thing. And the fact that there's no central director really helps contribute to the fact that everybody has a voice in the film, or at least that's what we really try to facilitate. Some people were a lot quieter than others, didn't have a lot to say, didn't really have any opinions one way or the other. But what we tried to all do as a group was make sure that even if they didn't have any new ideas or anything, that they got to say their piece. What did they think of this shot? What did they think of the backgrounds? Did they want to contribute anything to that? What's your feedback? Come to the meetings, make sure that everybody's getting involved. And I think kind of like having a project that everybody was passionate about from the beginning and seeing it come together and having this sense of solidarity, being the only stop motion film group, and learning everything together. And the fact that we were all sort of like treading water together, I suppose, and helping each other swim. I think that was really important to our group's cohesion. And like I said, I don't think there's no such thing as a perfect group, but for the most part, I think that we all got very fortunate to work with a group of very talented, very passionate, very driven individuals.
Nice. Wow. That was a really good summary. I really like what you said about no wasted work as well, because you also mentioned that you had to go through so many iterations and experimenting, and it all contributed to leading towards figuring out how to do things. So I think that's really good and positive. Yeah.
As artists, it's really easy for our egos to get ahead of us. We tie so much of our self-worth into our art, into what we create. So when that gets rejected, it can feel like a personal rejection. So I think it was very important for me and for Kia as production managers, who were kind of like making sure that everybody was getting things in on time, making sure everybody was working together to make sure that everybody knew that their efforts were valued. Yeah. I think it was just a matter of making sure everybody knew that and understood that of themselves and of each other and acknowledged that.
Nice. Yeah. I'm wondering, now that the film is finished and you've all had this huge learning experience, is anybody working on anything stop motion at the moment?
I just finished my thesis film with a stop motion film, making its festival run. I have won a few awards for it already. Keep your eyes out for Diptera. And I also just worked with a local, in Toronto, a local artist named Martha Grant on a little bit of a fun little music video. I don't know if I can release the details for it yet, but I got to animate with her on that. And it's a very fun kind of project for kids. And I think as soon as it's out, it'll just be really fun. nice to get on a project that I've worked on 2 horror films now. So it was fun to get on a comedy project.
From horror to kids.
Oh yeah.
Is anybody else working on any stop motion or planning on it or whatnot? Or is this experience just kind of, I did it?
A little bit stop motioned out for the time being. We'll
Stop
see.
motion
have an
down for
idea
the-
that I want to do.
Yeah. So, sorry, Tawny, you were saying?
Oh yeah, I have like an idea of what would have been my 4th year film that I wanted to do at least the main character in stop motion because it's important, which
Yeah.
is just like, he's just a frog. He's just a frog going on a little journey doing the devil's laundry.
Oh, I
That's
know
it.
exactly what this is.
It was the one I pitched. Like Heather pitched Cantastoria and then I pitched this nonsense story, but I still think it would be fun to work on because I have brain rot. So if I have time, because I'm still trying to work on my storyboard portfolio, then maybe one day it will be a thing.
100%. Yeah, I would love to see that. I loved it.
I was a huge fan of it.
Yeah. Question, I guess, going forward in the future, would you ever try, if you're going to do stop motion, would you try to do it remotely again? Like, I'm wondering, did you open yourselves up to the process enough that you would be open to working remotely in stop motion to create something like this again? Or would you prefer to have a totally different experience and do everything with like a group of people in like a workshop type of thing?
That is a really interesting question. I think
I feel like-
fabrication wise, I would love to not have to do it in my home again, mostly for safety concerns. I think having an actual workshop with professional tools would make a huge difference, you know?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like we made it work. I think an aspect of making it work was the fact that we had no professional experience, so we were making it up anyway. But I think there's we don't have the professional experience other than you, Terry, so we can't really say one way or another. Personally, I think it was way too much of a mess. Like we made it work, but it was way too much of a mess. Probably much better having a studio and like a set space and more of a workflow.
Yeah,
Well,
I agree. Having worked on a remote film, my own solo film, and then a film with a professional in like a studio environment, I definitely prefer the studio. I think the idea that a lot of the pre-production aspects can be done remotely opens up a lot of like, it opens up a lot more avenues for exploration with different artists. You can get a lot of different artists on the project without having to bring them in. But then when it comes to sort of like, fabrication, animation, that kind of thing, definitely in person is better. Because one of my favorite things about working on Cantastoria was Heather and I were the animators for the puppets, like the main stage, with occasionally bringing in other people on the team to help us out and do a little bit of animation. But my favorite experience was getting to work with Heather in person, and we get to kind of like bounce ideas off of each other. And this isn't quite working, let's try it like this. I feel like we really learned a lot from each other. And even as professionals and as friends, our relationship really, really grew, and we're still really good friends to this day.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of how to stay motivated on a project, I think that was one of the things that kept me going. You know, you get tired near the end, and having that motivation of like, my filming partner's coming and we got to make this happen, and it really did help. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I was asking because I was thinking like, for instance, there's a huge stop motion scene in the US, and then there's some projects in BC and Montreal and Toronto every once in a while, but in Canada, they're much more sparing and when one pops up, like, I heard of a project in BC where I was like, am I going to pack up my bags and go there for 2 weeks and then rent an apartment or an Airbnb and then come back? Like it's crazy versus like, I'm wondering if there's a possibility to open the doors for somehow, because, I'm working on a project with people in the UK right now. Like I've never seen them, but it's in 2D, which is very easy to do. But I'm wondering, is there some way to open doors for more stop motion to happen remotely through this experience? But also, I totally appreciate the fact that you enjoyed working together in a communal space much more, because stop motion is a hugely collaborative medium when it comes down to it. There's so much to do. Everybody has to have just because you're good at animating doesn't mean you're good at fabricating. Just because you're fabricating doesn't mean you're good at set design, blah, 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 blah. So like, A, you can be a jack of all trades, but B, it's so much more amazing to work with people who are super talented in what they do, but then you have to work so closely together. So it was just interesting to hear, especially Anna, because you've worked on all kind of three, your thoughts on that. So yeah.
I think if you're going to work with stop motion remotely, you have to make the project suit the pipeline. I think with a lot of animation, that's with it's not really there's not really a formula for catch-all for animation. Every single project needs its own kind of pipeline for it. And stop motion is especially one of those, especially if you're going to get a bit weird with it. But I think a remote film, and we actually saw this in some of the pitches where people were getting kind of weird with it, where it was like, okay, well, we have this very strange pipeline. How are we going to make the project fit that? We have to work remotely. Well, if continuity is an issue, why don't we just do a film where continuity is weird and everything is supposed to look different? We lean into that. And there were a couple pitches like that were really like that. Or we do things like this. Yeah, Terry. That's you, my guy.
Yeah, my pitch was basically we follow a storyline, but like the reality keeps changing. So everybody does their own thing at home using their interpretation of the characters. That was what I was thinking of doing. But anyways, yeah, sorry, continue.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what I mean. And Cantastoria, the project could be work to fit the pipeline where it's like, okay, so we have these recreatable images. Everybody gets their own image that's been recreated and we go on that. And then we do it all in comp. So there's definitely there's room for it in the industry. There's room for it in art. It's just about we have to be very creative to make it work, which is the exciting part.
It's almost like the original idea that you have has to kind of fit the pipeline that you want to create, which makes sense. Maybe it's kind of like one of my last questions, which is something that I am always interested in as a stop motion fanatic. But now that you've all done stop motion and professionally, Sheridan College, trained in 2D and dabbled in 3D and whatever. What is a reason to have a story told in stop motion versus 2D, which can be cheaper and easier and do more? Maybe Tawny, if you want to start, because you mentioned, you have this idea with this kind of frog prince devil thing, but you said the main character has to be in stop motion. Why is that?
Because it's a frog and he gets human legs, and the human legs have to be Barbie legs, and it's integral. I actually bought a Barbie. I have the legs. It's important to me to tell the story that I want to tell. That he has Barbie legs. Specifically, it can't be drawn Barbie legs. It has to be Barbie legs.
Yeah.
So that's important to me. Also, another pro to doing stop motion is at the end you get a bunch of little toys. It's like a prize for finishing your film.
Now I have all these toys. No, but what you just said is like, when I have an idea, I'll have a stop motion specific idea, and if it's executed in like 2D, it doesn't ring true to what the idea is itself. But I'll have like 2D ideas.
It's not the same. It's like
motion. It's not the same. Yeah, I'm wondering,
it's like
Stephen.
So tactile, and it's what's fun about it.
Yeah. I'm wondering, Stephen, having going through and cut out all these 2D shapes forever, what is your take on this?
I think for me, a big thing is like stop motion presents like this ability to make things come to life that you just can't get in like 2D and 3D, or maybe 3D as it marches like closer and closer to reality, you'll kind of, fill that niche. But if you want a story about a teddy bear that comes to life, if you have a real teddy bear that really moves, it's got like that real like magic to it that you don't get if you just draw a teddy bear, standing up. Or like with Cantastoria, part of it was it's a puppeteer telling you a story with her little paper puppets. And the idea is like, not only is it, we've got a real life puppet that we've built that's doing the puppeteering, we've got the actual like paper puppets acting and moving. So it's like it adds to the actual idea, like the physical execution enhances the concept.
Totally. You're stop motion animating a puppet, which is stop motion animating her own puppets.
Yeah.
Heather, what about you? You went through all this fabrication and felting forever and all that crazy effort it takes to make a few moments happen on screen. Like, what is a really solid reason that something has to be stop motion and can't be something else?
Well, I think for me, I'm kind of two minds about it. And one of them would be, I think as, digital artists, there's sort of a lack of connect we can have with the things that we make. So on kind of like an artistic level, it's this ability to be hands-on and to make something that's physical and really exists in the world,
Yeah.
right? This idea of these like puppets being a thing that's made, or these beautiful sets that get to be a thing that's made, something about it is so special, you know? And I think the other part is exactly that, like, this feeling of that, right? Of these like very tactile things then being on screen. I think there's like kind of a new way to connect to that via story. Like Anna was saying, for me, stop motion horror is something I adore. And there's something just like so inherently creepy about a doll getting up and moving on its own. It just works. It works in a way that I don't think it could be done any other way,
Totally. Yeah. 100. Dolls are always creepy. Yes. Anna, how about you?
Um, this is such an awesome question because animation is not, it's very much the illusion of life. It is the illusion of something being real, but it's the fourth wall being kind of constructed in a way that we have to make things seem real that don't look real. We have to make things appear or feel in a certain way. And there's always a different way that you can do that. I'm very much of the opinion that a good storyteller can make a story work in any medium, but that doesn't mean that it's the best medium for that story. What I like about stop motion and what I like about storytelling is that it's a way that we can connect to a different experience. We can connect to a different mindset. We can connect to different characters. And with stop motion, it is a tactile, physical connection. Whether that looks like real life or not, it's better than real life because it is, you push your emotions, you push the feelings, you push the words and the dialogue and the characters. Everything is exaggerated in a way that feels real, so we can connect to it in a way that you can't connect with real life people. And stop motion is kind of every good thing about storytelling for me. It pushes the tactile nature of our minds. It makes things uncanny and it makes things whimsical and strange, and it's got so many applications. It just like every single part of animation has these incredible applications that we can kind of connect with on an emotional level. And so that's why I think that there's sometimes it's hard to explain because sometimes a story just has to be a certain way. And it's not a logic thing, it's feeling, it's heart, it is art. And that is what we have to do as animators, is we have to connect a feeling that we cannot name and bring it to you as a viewer.
Yeah. Wow. I'm writing all these because I'm approached with this all the time because I'm pitching stop motion shows to studios that only do 2D, and they always ask me like, okay, well, why does this have to, we'll just slap some 3D whatever. And I'm like, no, it has to be stop motion. Otherwise it's not the same. So I super appreciate, hearing all of your opinions and thoughts, and they all 100% make sense to me. Cool. Well, you've shared, why you had to make this film, kind of the inceptions of how you all got in stop motion, the whole process of making this film. I'm wondering, as we're wrapping up, is there anything left that you would like to share, or that people listening should know about the process of this film, or just your experience in making it, or just, your experience coming through school and trying out all these different mediums and what you've learned in general, or just what is your favorite color? I don't know. Do you have anything you'd like left to share that you think would be interesting for people to hear?
I know for me, there was a certain takeaway from the film of it being this thing that I thought, wouldn't it be cool if this got to be real?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be amazing if that actually existed? And now it does. And I think that was one of the most special experiences for me of like, especially like getting to see it done and getting to see, all these different people work on it and how it really grew from that original seed of an idea. So don't be afraid to chase those. Wouldn't it be fun?
Isn't that
You
crazy?
don't know what you're
You're just
gonna
like,
get.
wouldn't this be a cool idea? And then a year later, 11 people later, sweat, blood, and tears later, it's now winning awards and festivals. I think that's amazing. That's what I love about storytelling and animation, like personally, because you're just like, I have this random thought.
It really is. I think for me, my main takeaway was, look how awesome an idea can become when you let other people get their hands on it. I think as artists, like I said earlier, artists have a lot of ego. We connect a lot of ourselves to our ideas and to our storytelling. But look what happens when you get so many other people and hearing their ideas and making them work together. You get something that you yourself could never have made. That doesn't make you like less of an artist. That makes you a filmmaker. And that makes you an animator. That makes you part of this beautiful, wonderful industry that we all get to be a part of. And that the fact that this was our kind of like foot in the door for that, I could not be more proud.
Yay. Tawny or Steven, do you have anything that you'd like to share? If not, that's cool too. I'm just curious.
Sorry, you go, Tawny.
Oh, nothing. I was just gonna say it was just very special to me because it was mine and Heather's sort of baby, and we basically like went insane for like 6 months, like together in the same room, and it was special, and that's my favorite part.
Special insanity.
I think for me, it's a matter of learning that like if you have a bunch of people who have an exciting idea and are passionate about it and driven to make something like special and cool, it really will end up being like special and cool. Because we all sat down on the first day and we're like, hey, we've got some ideas. Who's excited to get started? And then, you know, just like you said, you fast forward 11 months later and you've got this like fantastic thing that's better than any one person could have made. So like, if you have the idea, chase it, because like it'll end up being amazing.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you, everybody. It's been an absolute pleasure, having you on. And I'm just like, I mean, I knew a lot of it, but it was also very insightful for me to hear firsthand how everything went after I left. So this has just been a really cool chat for me to listen to personally. And I hope for everybody listening as well. So thank you so much for everybody coming on. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having us on.
Yeah.
It's been really lovely. Thanks,
Yeah.
Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a treat.
Amazing. And if you're listening and you want to get in touch with any of the lovely people that were on this podcast, I'm going to include all of their Instagram and Twitter accounts. And of course, you should watch Cantastoria because it's amazing. And I'll include a link to the YouTube for that as well. And thank you so much for listening. That's all for now. Okay, bye. The music for this podcast was composed by Will Farmer and the graphics by Daniel Abensauer. I encourage you to look them up if you enjoyed their work.